Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're very happy to have Elizabeth Griswold with us today. She pastors and directs things at the United Church of Christ in Southland Park. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, John. Glad to be here.
Nice to have you. Let's begin with where you grew up. Where were you raised? Where did you go to high school? Parents, siblings, those kinds of things that people would want to know.
Sure. So I'm from Carlsbad, a suburb of San Diego, down in North San Diego County. And I was born there and lived there my whole childhood up until I was 18. And went to Carlsbad High and grew up going to a United Church of Christ in Carlsbad at Pilgrim. And so my family was made up of my parents, and there were 4 of us siblings. I have an older sister, an older brother, and then a younger brother.
Are your parents still living?
Yeah, they still live in Carlsbad, still together, still living down there.
Well.
Exactly.
How old were you when you decided you wanted to do something in the faith?
I first thought about it when I was about 18. Actually, it's kind of a typical story. The church I was going to when I was in college, the pastor there noticed that I seemed to be really interested and really involved, and was definitely the youngest person who attended the church, and I sang in the choir with all the old ladies, and I just loved it. And he said, "Have you thought about ministry? Because you seem to really like it here." And I was sort of surprised by the question because I really hadn't thought of it, but it planted a seed. I didn't end up going to seminary for until another 10 years later, but did first start thinking about it in my late teens.
Where'd you go to college?
This was at UCLA.
Oh.
And I was majoring in religion and also English. And almost all of my friends were very religious too, but of other faiths. Like I lived in an apartment my junior and senior year with 4 other women, and they were 2 women were Jewish and 1 was Muslim and another one was Catholic. And then I was the Protestant. And we didn't do that intentionally. It was just those were my best friends. And so we would end up celebrating different holidays together, going home to visit our each other's families, and really learned a lot together.
That happened to me in the military.
Oh, sure.
I got invited to sing in an Interfaith choir and found out I was surrounded with all cultures and beliefs, and I liked it.
Yeah.
And we'd sit around sometime before a church was starting, or as we were traveling back to the base after it was ending. That was out in the Denver area, and we sang in lots of churches on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I really liked that.
Nice.
I'd get in bed Sunday night and think, oh, that's been a good weekend. and we did some Christian hymns, and we did some non-Christian hymns, and
right.
we did, we were taught some African chants and a whole bunch of other things, and it was just a lot of fun. I thought, wow, these people are all just regular people.
There you go.
That was really fun. Now, how did you end up in Sacramento?
Sure. So, like I said, after those initial seeds were planted, I kind of considered ministry for another 10 years and ended up going to seminary when I was about 28. And then when I graduated, I was called to a church in California, initially down in Irvine in Southern California, and I was the associate pastor there for about 4 years. And then I started looking around thinking, I'd kind of like to be the lead pastor somewhere, and heard about this church in Sacramento where I am now, Parkside Community Church. And we, in our denomination, we have a process where, you can apply, and then they have a search committee that will interview you, etc. So at the end of that process, we all felt like it seemed like a good fit. So I started here in July of 13.
That's a nice church down there. I've been down there several times in the last 10 years, and I'm always welcomed, and people introduce themselves, and a lovely sanctuary. And,
thank you.
That's a really, really nice group. Now, people would want to know that you're married to a Jewish rabbi.
It's true.
How did that come to be?
Right. So it was actually when we met when I was in seminary and he was in rabbinical school. And this was in the Boston area. And he actually showed up at church one morning. He liked to joke that that's where every rabbi meets their spouse,
See you in
Not
church.
true. Yeah, exactly. Seth, my husband, was volunteering with the Obama campaign. This was in 2008. And he had actually been planning on attending another church that morning where he was going to be speaking with the pastor about possibly getting involved in the campaign. But something fell through at the other church, and he knew that Obama had been connected to the United Church of Christ, to my denomination, and he lived in the neighborhood of this little church where I was working as an intern. And so he showed up that morning, and our pastor was out of town, so I was leading the service. So I actually remember being up front and seeing him in the crowd, which was a small crowd, mind you. We probably had about 18 in worship that day. And
sometimes the best crowd are the small ones, yeah.
And we just started talking afterwards and found we had a lot in common.
And did you know a fair amount about the Jewish faith by then, based on college and other things?
I had been studying it, and had felt actually very drawn to it spiritually as well. I had a number of friends who were Jewish. I used to go to Shabbat services with them quite frequently. I was involved with the Hillel Student Center when I was an undergrad. And then I had studied it both in college and also then in seminary. And actually, when we met, I was studying Hebrew. So he also jokes that that's really why I started dating him, so I could have a Hebrew tutor.
In my military days, one of my bunkmates was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. He was from the South, Atlanta, I think. A really, really good kid.
Mm-hmm.
One that I immediately was drawn to, and we'd sit and write letters home to our parents and things.
Yeah.
Anyway, a really good kid. And he said to me one day, why would you like a Jew? And I said to him, because Jesus was a Jew.
Sure.
And he went, oh, yeah, that's a pretty good reason, he said. And I said, that's just the way it works for me.
Right.
So how has that been for you to share Jewish? You've got a daughter.
Yes.
How does she go along with both faiths?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're not sure if we're exaggerating, but we often say we'd probably been dating about 2 weeks when we started talking about, could this work? Could we have a marriage?
That's
could
cool.
we raise children? Where it felt like a very significant connection. And we thought, well, if we want to go forward with this, we need to kind of figure out these big, important questions, because we were both studying and training to become clergy in our respective faiths. And very early on, it was clear to both of us that if we had children together, we'd want to raise them in basically with one faith identity. It was actually very important to me because my family was not very religious when I was growing up. My mom took us to church, but it wasn't like a thing the family all did together. My siblings didn't like it. My dad never came. And I just really took to it. And I always wished that it was something the whole family did together and was more part of our communal life. And so that was something I really wanted for my own child. And it was important more for Seth to kind of carry on the Jewish heritage.
Sure.
And so it felt pretty clear that if we were to have kids, that we would want to raise them Jewish. And because of my own connection to Judaism, I always felt very drawn to it. That was what we decided. And it doesn't mean it's been easy in practice. Yeah, we do have a 4-year-old now, Lila, who we are raising Jewish. And so at home, we pretty much, that's where we land. We keep kosher. She has a lot of Jewish books. We all go to synagogue together. We celebrate the Jewish holidays. She does come to church too. People at church laugh. They say, oh, well, she's Jewish, but she comes to church more than we do, And we want her to learn about other religions as well.
I was there the last time.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Right. So we want her to be, well-versed in a number of different faiths, but to have her identity within Judaism.
And is she old enough to understand what direction she's sort of going in her faith?
Yes, definitely. I mean, she actually told us, we recently, in January, we went and visited Seth's brother, who lives in India with his family. He's married to a Hindu Brahmin woman, and they live in Delhi with their 2 sons. And I think she heard one of us talking about this, and when we came back, she said, Buddhism came out of Hinduism in the same way that Christianity came out of Judaism. And we were like, well, yes, that's true, honey.
Out of the mouths of babes. So.
Yeah, she thinks about religion a lot. She asks a lot of questions. She's a real curious kid, and we are expecting another baby this fall.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Family's so wonderful.
Yeah, we're pretty excited, and she's very excited. But until now, she's been an only child, and I think has paid attention a lot to adult conversations, and a lot of our conversations are about religion.
You know, I've taken our children to meetings before where it appeared to me they slept all the way through.
Oh, sure.
It'd be something being shown on a video, the lights would be turned down, I'd look over and it'd look like they were gone. And then 2 days later at supper or something, they would out with something that had been said, that had been heard, and I'd been sitting there thinking, gee, I wish he would have heard that.
Right.
And he caught every word of it.
They took it in.
Holy Toledo. How about, what did your parents think when you announced you were going to marry a Jewish man?
Well, I think my mom definitely understood the connections that we shared, and that we do have a lot in common. We love religion, we love ritual, we love the Bible, we love the connection of faith and social justice. We see that we want our lives to be infused with loving God and how that influences everything that we do. I tell people a lot, I feel like I have so much more in common with Seth as a rabbi, a faith leader in another religion, than I would with, I could be married to somebody who's Christian in name or by family, but it's not really part of their life. So my mom, who does go to church, I think she understood all those things, and our church is very progressive and very open-minded. And my dad, he from the get-go, some of his friends were like, oh, so she's marrying a Jewish guy and he's a rabbi, and well, that's kind of different. He was like, I know, she likes religion, he does too, it's so weird, but they found each other, so I think she's happy.
What touches your life with faith that might not touch it if you weren't religious and loved it?
I think about, yesterday I was sitting in on a meeting with our youth group at the church, and the leader had all the kids go around and say, their little check-in is, they are supposed to say share a wow, a pow, and a how about their week. Yeah. So something wow that was really positive for them, a pow, something that was hard that they struggled with, and then the how has to do with, how did you see God show up this week?
That's a good approach.
Yeah, and it was such a blessing for these, teenagers to kind of think about their lives through that lens. And I thought, that is a wonderful way to look at things. And I thought about that, to think about, how do I see God showing up? And I think that lens of looking for, the impact of God in our lives, or looking through, how might I, the cliche, what would Jesus do? Or something along those lines, in terms of decisions I'm making in my daily life that are definitely influenced by my faith, that may not be there otherwise.
I was raised in a Christian home, and my father died when I was 8, killed in an accident. And my mother's attitude was, he wouldn't want us to be, wallowing in self-pity and sorrow. He'd want us to go, want us to press on and be happy and all those other things. And one of the things the church gave to me was, nothing had changed. We still sang, we still prayed, we still did the sacrament, we had service things to do, we had fun things to do.
Sure.
We associated with each other, we worshiped in the name of God and of Jesus, and nothing changed. And even though Dad was no longer in the picture, all of that just kept right on rolling. And that was really beneficial for me personally.
Yeah, a lot of stability there.
I like that a lot. Let's talk Parkside for a minute. I've visited there 3 or 4 or 5 times in the last 10 years. Why have you been able to become so open-minded down there? I mean, did that just happen one day, or what? How did that come to be?
Yeah, I think part of it is our denomination as a whole tends to be more that way in the United Church of Christ. We're a non-creedal church. People don't have to all believe the same thing. One of the sayings within the church is, never place a period where God has put a comma. It's a quote from the comedian Gracie Allen, but so then people have used that to say, God is still speaking. There's ongoing revelation. We don't have to take, interpretations, or the Bible is the end, and there's only one way to read it, and there's nothing more. But why shouldn't God still be speaking to us today through our own intellect and our own experiences in the world? And so, so the UCC kind of sets that tone in general. And Parkside itself, I think, has a very open-minded and progressive stance. And a lot of that, I would give credit to my predecessor, Reverend Susan Hamilton, served the church for, I want to say 12 or 15 years before I came. Yep. And she had a wonderful ministry there, and just drew in so many great people who I'm getting the benefit of working with now. And I think a lot of the work that I've been doing these past 4 years since I've been there, we've been having a lot of fun together. And every time I bring up a new idea, the church is like, yeah, let's try it. They're just eager and curious and big-hearted and generous. And I've really enjoyed that. And we've become sort of last fall we had a whole series on the notion of sanctuary. And both, especially in this political climate, actually, we're voting this Sunday whether we want to become a solidarity church that supports churches offering sanctuary to immigrants, but also as a spiritual sanctuary, where I think if somebody is looking for a church that has more of a conservative or traditional take on things, whether theologically or politically in the Christian realm, they have a lot of options here in Sacramento, and that's great.
That's true.
And I think if somebody's looking for a church that has stances that are more progressive theologically and politically, there aren't as many. So we're really sort of becoming a sanctuary for folks who don't fit into other churches exactly, where one thing about our church is it's very, very welcome to ask questions and to admit you're exploring. And a long time ago, I want to say in the mid-90s, the church voted to become what we call in our denomination open and affirming, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folks. And so we've really been living into that for many years. And yeah, I'm really excited about all the directions we're going in. And we've been growing with a lot of new families and young kids recently, and it's been great.
Now, the times I've been down there, they're a little mature group.
Sure.
Sprinkled with others. But have those people been coming there a good many years, and they've found a home and a place to nest, and life is good?
Yeah, the church started in like 1954, I want to say, and we do have still some founding members.
Really?
Yeah, which is really lovely, who
That's
carry
really
that history
fun.
and the legacy.
When you walk into a building, I do about 100 religious services a year.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll do 2 or 3 in a week, and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Sure.
And the similarities are incredible.
Mm-hmm.
They're incredible. But the other thing that happens is you can walk into a congregation and know in 5 seconds if it feels safe and comfortable and loving and godly, as opposed you might walk into one and things are stirring and are stirred, and you can feel that. So when I go to Parkside, it's settled and peaceful. And
I'm glad to hear that.
I love the friendliness.
Yes, it's a very friendly bunch.
Very friendly. See, I noticed a man down there a month or 2 ago in a wheelchair in the choir. I was interested by him. Is that just with age, or has he been in a wheelchair for long years?
Yeah, no, just with age. Paul is actually in his 90s.
Really?
He looks much younger.
He does.
He has a lot
and
of
he
energy.
sang for you. That was really fun. That isn't something you see all the time.
Sure.
And I thought that's really, really cool. So, what do you do for the next 4 years? Let's say, are you just going to try to? I mean, is it just more of the same and just keep pressing on? Or?
Right. No, good question. Well, we recently have had a lot of transition, actually, staff-wise at the church, and we were able to call a part-time associate pastor, which is such a blessing. It was kind of a mixed blessing because we lost a staff member. We had a commissioned minister for congregational health. She was actually a registered nurse who's been on staff for about 20 years, doing a health ministry, and she's retiring. And so we combined hours over to our person, Reverend Bonnie Rambob, who does our children and youth ministry. And so now Bonnie has a fuller role at the church, and she's been doing amazing things with our Sunday school and starting a youth group and more pastoral care. And it's been through her work, even just in these past several months, that we've really been growing with younger people, which I know has been a priority at the church for a long time, and it's exciting to see it finally coming to fruition.
Long years ago, when I was serving as a full-time ordained bishop, a man who I looked to for mentorship and other things said to me, "Now remember, you can really help the elderly, and you can love them and protect them and provide for them. And the children you can teach and really channel and champion and help. The ones in between, they're not going to pay too much attention to you. And I said, okay, I'll watch that. And 3 or 4 years later, I was thinking, yeah, I think he's right. You'd go out with the elderly people and love them and help them and take them and do them and be them and all the things they need to do. And then the kids are just chomping at the bit to learn more and be more and all that. And then everybody in between's, well, yeah, I go to church and it's a nice life.
Sure.
Did you learn to pray as a child? As a little girl, were you a prayer or?
I think I would say I was self-taught.
Fair enough.
It wasn't something that my parents taught me. And we probably went to church once a month or once every 6 weeks. I was the kid who was, I'd wake up Sunday morning, can we go to church today? And my parents would say, no, the Chargers are on TV, the football team.
Sure.
And I'd be
who are moving to Los Angeles.
They're not even in San Diego, exactly. All those faithful Sundays didn't turn out to mean anything. But but I yearned for it. I did. I longed to connect to God more. I'd sort of make up my own prayers, and try to do it on my own, which was hard as a child. I felt in some ways like a spiritual orphan. Although I wouldn't have had those words then, but looking back now. And it's interesting, I think, that I've created a family now in which I'm a little bit of a spiritual orphan too, as the only Christian in my own home.
That actually matches up pretty good, though, with the gospel of Jesus Christ.
There you go.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
It's the whole Good Samaritan, even.
Yeah.
If you want to just look at it in a loving overview.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and the Jewish faith is so terrific, and there's so many good things and so much tradition,
and we've been able. It's been a real blessing too for me as a pastor to be able to bring more of the Jewish background and learning to my church, and the congregants have been so open and welcoming and wanting to learn more about Jesus' religion, about the Hebrew Bible. That I've been able to teach, or that Seth has been able to come and he's preached, or he's led Sunday school, or right now he's actually leading a meditation class at the church, and they just love that interfaith learning too.
Now, you mentioned earlier you'd sing in the choir and that. Did you do that just because you loved to sing, or did they proselyte you and say, we've got to have somebody in the choir, or how did that go?
Some of both. And I think it was also just another way to get involved. When I was a teenager, I sang in the adult choir at my church, and then in the choir again in college. Although I don't really advertise that too widely with my church now. I'm not going to join the choir of my own church, do the sermon, sing in the choir, do all of it. But I think song and music are such a huge part of worship, and helps us get out of our heads sometimes into another space of being spiritually connected.
And that really good music is such a universal language.
Absolutely.
Everybody speaks it. Everybody understands it. In my faith, when a boy turns 12, he's ordained to the Aaronic priesthood. And at 12, I'm trying to grasp that and understand it. But to my mother particularly, that was a big deal. That was sort of a rite of passage that I had arrived at that point. But she said to me the Sunday that I was ordained, well, if you're old enough to have the priesthood and do things in it, then that means you're old enough to sing in the choir.
Oh, sure.
Because that's what she'd been doing for years and years. So I drifted into choir practice, a week or two later, and I, of course, had to be a tenor. That was, a high voice. And I immediately fell in love with that. And I don't know exactly why, except that it was the universal language. I understood it. And the choir director was a woman who was very patient and understanding, and she liked to mix things up a little bit. And sometimes the men would do things in unison, sometimes in part. Anyway, music just pretty soon was just a real part of worship, as opposed to sitting in the congregation just singing a hymn.
Sure.
When you're in the choir and all those things. Are your siblings religious?
Yes and no. Interestingly, my sister also married a Jewish man, but I can't say that either of them are very religious. They sort of they observe all the holidays with their kids, both Christian and Jewish,
The kids probably think that's pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of celebration. But I don't think she's, in her heart, it's not really a big part of her life. My older brother married, I think everybody married people more religious than they are out of my siblings. My older brother's wife is Seventh-day Adventist. So she really leads that life of faith in their family, and they're bringing up their kids in that tradition. And my brother is sort of on the outskirts of it. And then my younger brother and his wife go to the Unitarian Universalist Church. So everybody's on all different paths.
I noticed their leader just resigned a day or two ago. His term was going to be up, I think, at the end of the summer, and he's old enough to be retirement age. And
sure.
He said, I've just been thinking that it's time that somebody new step in. And I just, that caught my eye, as that would be a big change if you've sort of been leading along there, and all of a sudden,
yeah, exactly.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's fine, sure.
The reason I ask you about the siblings is, my brothers and sisters have stayed in my faith, but at all levels of what you do.
Right.
And one of the things with family is you love them and care about them, but you have to accept them.
Sure.
You have to take them as they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're taking you as you are. And the reason that was of interest in my mind is, you said you weren't necessarily raised in a really religious home, but your daughter is being raised in a religious home, and that should make a great difference in her life, I would think.
Sure. Yes, sometimes I get a little jealous of her. I in some ways I'm creating for her what I wish I had when I was a kid, and nice. Then I really would have appreciated it.
Do you think there's still more good, faithful, religious people on earth than the bad guys?
Absolutely.
I do too.
Yeah. I know these arguments people have about, religion is the cause of all these problems. I think it's our hearts when they're filled with, greed or hatred or violence, and that happens to religious people and that happens to people who aren't religious, that's the problem. And that religion can be a place where we can speak of God's love and faithfulness and abundance and peace. And I think secular people can do that too, but I especially feel it as a calling for myself as a Christian, for sure.
Most Sundays I come home from church edified and inspired. And when I go to all the other faiths, I generally feel that too.
Sure.
And of course it changes as soon as you step outside the door and go back into the road rage out on El Camino, or whatever's going on. And I think, if you can kind of recharge all the time at church.
Exactly.
That's a good thing.
And it's interesting lately, I've been noticing, I lead services on Sundays, and it can be hard to find myself into a worshipful space of being able to just be in that space where I'm sort of leading and orchestrating things.
Right.
And then often we'll go to services at the synagogue on Friday night, and it's there that I can actually just be and worship and really feel present to God's presence.
That's a nice story to think about. What about, as we draw near to the end of talking here, do you think, is the world just hearing too much of the bad news and not enough of the good? Or, why are, everybody's angry and stirred up, and somebody doesn't like, so-and-so, and
sure.
It seems a little worse now than it used to.
Yeah, I think things do seem especially polarized in our country. I think
good way to say that.
Yeah, this last election, there was a lot of drawing up sides and creating enemies and division, and I'd love to see more, reaching across the aisle and people finding commonality, and it's hard to see all of those battles so often. I think there certainly is. Like you say, there's a lot of good happening in religion. There's a lot of good happening in our country of people, serving each other and volunteering in their communities and trying to create peace and acceptance. But yeah, that doesn't necessarily sell the news, and so we don't get to hear about it as much.
Well, if you could wave a magic wand in all of this and fix or change or repair or whatever, what would you do there?
What keeps coming up a lot for me recently is when Jesus talks about not just love your neighbors, but love your enemies. And so I think if folks really could take that more to heart and think, who's my enemy? And why do I think they're my enemy again? whether it's reaching out across racial lines or issues of somebody being, their documentation status, or immigration issues, or religious lines, that we find so many ways to create difference, that if we could really see another person as our neighbor, and how are you called to treat your neighbor.
And when we do reach out, we find out most of the time they're really good people.
Exactly.
How come I haven't done this 20 years ago?
Right, right. Your own heart will be better, your life will be better, and the world will be too.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, John.
It's
Glad
nice
to be
visit
here.
with you. And bless you.
Bless you too.